You must have heard of the name Ken Saro-Wiwa. He was from Ogoni land in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. He was hanged by his government for one simple reason, because he was standing in the way of petrodollars. Now, this is Ogoni land, a tiny patch of southern Nigeria that happens to sit on a massive sea of oil. For decades, big oil companies like Shell took the wealth and left the people with nothing but poisoned water and dead crops. Ken wasn't a soldier or a rebel. He was just a writer who refused to stay quiet and watch his homeland get destroyed. He turned a small protest into a global fight against a massive empire, and in 1995, the government killed him to stop the protest and stop the movement. Welcome to this edition of Back in History, and stay tuned for the story of a man who fought for his people and paid the ultimate price in the end. First, let's look at the math of marginalization in 1990s Nigeria. At the time, the country had a population of roughly 100 million people. The three major ethnic groups, the Hausa, Fulani, Yoruba and Igbo, made up nearly 65% of the population and held almost all of the federal and military power. The Ogoni people, on the other hand, numbered just 500,000. That was less than 0.5% of the national population. Yet, their tiny 404 square mile ancestral homeland was generating massive portion of the nation's wealth, the oil money. The military government led by General Sani Abacha at the time took the oil money to build up major cities like Lagos and Abuja and Kano, and to fund a military run by the majority ethnic groups. Meanwhile, the localized minority was left to deal with 100% of the ecological fallout. But here is the reality on the ground. While billions of dollars were flowing into the bank account of multinational corporations and military generals in Lagos and Abuja, the people living on top of the oil were getting nothing. Actually, they were getting something worse than nothing. They were getting environmental collapse. By the late 1980s, Ogoni land was a disaster zone. Because of outdated equipment and zero regulation, oil spills were constant. The fish in the creeks died. The soil became toxic. And then there was the gas flaring. Instead of capturing the natural gas that comes up with the oil, the companies just lit it on fire. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for decades. In some Ogoni villages, children grew up believing that the sky was black, never getting the chance to stare into the blue skies during the day or watching the stars of the night twinkle. So for them, the popular nursery rhyme, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," was like a myth. The horizon was always orange from the flares. The people were dying, the land was toxic, and the money was gone. Most people felt helpless, but Ken Saro-Wiwa was different. He wasn't a soldier. He was a popular TV producer and an anchor. He understood that in the modern world, you don't fight a billion-dollar oil company with a gun. You fight them with a narrative. He did not just want a cleanup of Ogoni land. He wanted the oil to stop flowing until the people get their share. And in 1990, he did something the military government of Nigeria never expected. He took action. This is something nobody had ever tried. January 4, 1993. This is the day the math changed. Mossab was created, the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people. Ken Saro-Wiwa spent 3 years educating farmers and fishermen on a single concept, which is political autonomy. He drafted the Ogoni Bill of Rights. He demanded 3 things, namely a share of the oil revenue, the right to protect the environment, and political representation. When the government ignored the paper, Saro-Wiwa began to assemble his people. The numbers are staggering. On January 4, an estimated 300,000 Ogoni people took to the streets. Think about that scale. The total Ogoni population at the time was roughly 500,000. That means 60% of the entire ethnic group, men, women and children, stopped working and started marching. They weren't carrying weapons. They were carrying green leaves as a symbol of their dying environment. This wasn't an ordinary parade. It was a physical blockade of the global oil economy. For the first time in 30 years, the drilling stopped. The pipelines went cold. The pressure worked. Later that year, Shell Oil officially declared Ogoni land too dangerous to operate in. They pulled their staff out. They abandoned their oil rigs. For the Ogoni people, this was a historic victory. One man and a peaceful crowd had just defeated a multinational giant. But for the Nigerian military government, this was a declaration of war, and this was unacceptable to the military. Nigeria's national budget was almost 90% dependent on oil exports. To the generals in Abuja, Ken Saro-Wiwa wasn't a human rights activist. He was a financial terrorist. He was a man standing between the military and their bank accounts. The government did not try to negotiate with him. They did not offer a cleanup. They sent in the Internal Security Task Force led by Major Paul Okuntimo. The objective was simple: to break the movement so the oil could flow again. Now, the government just needed a reason to arrest Ken Saro-Wiwa and remove him from the picture permanently. May 21, 1994, a meeting is held in the Ogoni village of Gioku. The community is divided. On one side are the pro-government elders. On the other side is the younger radicalized Mosob. A mob of angry youths descended on the meeting. In that chaos, 4 Ogoni chiefs were beaten to death. The military government, led by General Sani Abacha, did not wait for an investigation. They had an excuse. Within 24 hours, Ken Saro-Wiwa and a number of other Mosob leaders were arrested and charged with inciting the murders. But some sources say that Ken Saro-Wiwa wasn't even at the village at the time. They maintain that military blockades had physically blocked him from entering the area hours before the violence started. But the state did not care. This vital piece of information did not matter to them. The government did not take them to a regular high court. They set up a civil disturbances special tribunal. During the trial, the prosecution produced witnesses who claimed Ken Saro-Wiwa told the youth to deal with the elders. But decades later, the truth about those witnesses came out. 2 of the star witnesses, Charles Danwe and Nayone Akbar, signed sworn affidavits admitting that the Nigerian military and the multinational oil companies' representatives had offered them bribes to testify against Ken Saro-Wiwa. They were promised money, jobs at Shell, and houses in exchange for their lives. Despite the clear lack of physical evidence and the compromised witnesses, the tribunal reached its conclusion on October 31, 1995. The verdict for Ken Saro-Wiwa and his 8 colleagues, now known as the Ogoni 9, was death by hanging. International leaders, including Nelson Mandela and Bill Clinton, pleaded for clemency. Shell Oil issued a weak statement saying they were, quote, concerned. But the military junta did not care about international diplomacy. They cared about the multi-billion dollars that was lying fallow on the ground. They wanted the Ogoni resistance dead so the oil could flow again. The tribunal was headed by a judge of the Federal High Court of Nigeria, Honorable Justice Ibrahim Auta, and the lead prosecutor for the federal government of Nigeria was J.B. Daudu, now senior advocate of Nigeria. November 10, 1995, Port Harcourt prison. The Nigerian government was in a hurry. They did not even wait for the mandatory 30-day appeal period to expire. They moved the Ogoni 9 to the gallows just 10 days after the verdict. But even the machinery of death failed that morning. Executioners in Nigeria at the time used a manual trapdoor system. When they tried to hang Ken Saro-Wiwa, we understand that the equipment malfunctioned. They tried again, it failed again. It took 5 separate attempts to successfully execute the 54-year-old author and environmental rights activist. His final recorded words were, quote, "Lord, take my soul, but the struggle continues." The military thought this would be the end of the Ogoni problem. They thought that by killing the leadership, the 300,000 protesters would go home and the oil would start flowing again. They were wrong. The execution triggered an immediate global backlash. Nigeria was instantly suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations. The United States of America and the European Union slapped the country with arms embargoes and travel bans. Shell oil faced a PR catastrophe that lasted decades. In 2009, rather than face a public trial in a US federal court for complicity in the killings, Shell paid a staggering $15.5 million settlement to the families of the Ogoni 9. They called it, quote, a humanitarian gesture and denied any legal liability. But the most significant fact is this: Shell hasn't pumped a single drop of oil in Ogoni land since 1993 till today. The military killed the man to save the billion-dollar revenue stream, but they ended up losing the asset entirely. The oil rigs are still rusting in the Delta mud. The pipelines are still silent. In 2011, the United Nations Environmental Program UNEP released a scientific report on Ogoni land. It confirmed everything Sarah Wiwa had been saying for decades. The water in some villages contained carcinogens like benzene at 900 times the safe limits. The report estimated that cleaning up the region would take 30 years and that it would cost an initial sum of $1 billion. Ken Saro-Wiwa wasn't a soldier, but he defeated a multi-billion-dollar corporation and a military dictatorship. He did it by proving that when you destroy a people's environment, you destroy their reason to comply with the states. I am Ekemi Nudim. Thank you for watching this edition of Back in History. If you want more factual, data-driven looks at the events that defined our nation Nigeria, Africa, and even countries around the world, hit the subscription button. I will see you in the next episode.